I'm talking with Dr. Warren Farrell, who has written a book that I believe is going to change people's lives for years to come. I really mean that, Dr. Farrell. It's not often you can say that about somebody's work, but Dr. Farrell's been an author. He wrote a book, Why Men Are the Way They Are. And I love your bio page on your website. It says, Why Warren is the way he is.
Yes, right. No one knows the answer to that question.
Yeah, right. And I thought that'd be maybe where your wife and kids and grandkids could fill it in.
Yes, exactly.
But you wrote a book, the one I'm talking about, and I just want to tell people right now, it's Farrell, Warren Farrell, The Boy Crisis. And you also did TED Talks. They're on YouTube. So I'm just telling people right now, guys, you need to get a hold of the book, need to grab it, read it, mark it up. Don't just get the electronic, buy the actual paper one so you can mark it up and use it. What precipitated the boy crisis in your life? Where'd that book come from, Warren?
It really came, I've been speaking on male-female issues since the, let's see now, late 60s, 1960s.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
I was on the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City and spoke all around the world on women's issues from pretty much women's perspective. And yet I began to, some of my books got translated in other languages, and as I was in Japan or some other place, I remember a Japanese teacher coming up to me and she said, we're having more trouble with our boys in our class than we are with our girls. And then I go to Australia and different places around the world, and they say a lot of the same thing. And so I'm thinking, what's this about? And so I started looking into this and seeing that in all 56 of the largest developed nations, boys were having significant problems. That is, they were falling behind girls on every academic subject, but especially on reading and writing, which of course are the two biggest predictors of success or failure. And so I started looking into what's that about. And I started to see that the developed nations have something in common. Being developed, they have a little bit more ability in the middle and upper middle class to be survival, being able to take care of survival to a greater degree than we have historically. And so once survival was taken care of, the governments and the societal permission was greater for being able to get divorces, which were basically, you'd be ostracized for that, 50,
Right.
60 years ago. And then the other permission that was granted was for children, often children, women who to have children without being married. And then I started looking into those two groups of people and seeing that among those who got divorced, a very high percentage of them were the father was not involved with the children to a great degree after divorce. And that particular demographic was having problems. At first, I saw in 5 or 6 different areas. But as I began to do the research for the boy crisis, I saw that the boys in particular were having problems in more than 50 areas of development, including depression, suicide, drugs, addiction to video games, addiction to porn, and just death from opioids.
Every character development area.
Every character development area. Now the girls were also having problems. That is what I call the dad-deprived boys and girls were both having problems. The girls were also having problems in almost all of those 50 areas, but their problems were less intense, less likelihood of committing suicide, less likelihood of being addicted to drugs or alcohol, less likelihood of doing a mass shooting.
So they didn't act out the same out of the pain or dysfunction.
Yes, and they still did have a lot of the problems. They were not nearly as likely to succeed. They were more likely to be depressed. They were more likely to commit suicide, but the suicide level, of boys and girls is very different. In the early 20s, it's about 5 times for boys for each 1 time that it is for girls. And so I started to say, well, all right, what 2 things happened for me, which was to say, why is dad so important? many of the women the women I knew were often used the word overwhelmed. They were just working morning, noon, and night to oftentimes produce money at a job, and then produce money taking care of children by themselves. And I realized here we have this women who are overwhelmed by not having the involvement of dad. Dads who felt they were without purpose and unneeded, and were often depressed and sometimes suicidal as a result of not being connected to the family. And if they, earned money, they didn't have the purpose of having that love connection with the children after they earned money. So they were suffering, and the children were suffering. So no one won in this situation. The
Right.
mothers didn't win, the dads didn't win, and the children really lost. And so I started to question that. And I had developed, when I did I submitted the proposal for the boy crisis to my publisher. I outlined 10 causes of the boy crisis. Now, all of those causes are included in the boy crisis, but I
Right.
found increasingly that the causes that were not dad deprivation were secondary causes. So, for example, if a boy goes from a mother-only home to a
Mhm.
female-only teaching school, the chances of him doing very badly are really significant. But on the other hand, if he goes from a mother only, if he has mother and father at home, and there's almost all female teachers at school, that doesn't have a huge impact on him. So
Hmm.
so one cause of the boy crisis is not having male teachers. But if there's a mother and father at home, that cause had very minimal impact. And
So,
that's
so fatherlessness or dad deprivation, as you said, Dr. Farrell, is a huge key in our societal functioning.
Exactly. I mean, we have huge amount of resources, put onto solving mental health problems.
Hmm.
Mental health problems are very rarely likely to occur in in married families where both the mother and father are significantly involved with the children. Even if the dad is experiencing what I call the father's catch-22, which is learning to love his family by being away from the love of his family, which is not satisfying to either the children or to him, and usually the mother either. Nevertheless, the stability and the guidance that he provides, and the types of tensions that he creates, positive tensions, end up leading to the children doing reasonably well. Not as well as children do when they have an active amount of father involvement.
Well,
And
the boy crisis is what we're talking about. I'm talking with Dr. Warren Farrell. It really is such a powerful work. And in the middle of the book, right smack in the middle, you hit this thing about grandfathers and biological dads and how important that is. And if essentially what all this research shows is that fathers are extremely important. And but I think that it seems to me, Dr. Farrell, that just my observation and work, it seems like we kind of minimize that, and we somewhat have been blind to the fact that there's a boy crisis.
we really have, and there's a reason for that.
Why
Um,
is that?
Historically speaking, what we cared about was boys. Every generation had its war, and
Right.
and in each generation's war, we said to the boys, you will be our hero if you will be willing to be to fight in this war. And look at your uncle there on
Mhm.
on the mantle, and he fought as a Marine in World War II. We are really proud of him, and he lost his life, and and we pray for his memory and so on. And so the boy starts learning. He's experiencing what I call a social bribe to be disposable and if he saves the country, if he saves
Mhm.
protects the family, but he is being bribed to die so others will live. Well, if you have a son and you know that he will potentially go to war and potentially die, it's harder to attach to him emotionally
Hmm.
than it is to somebody that you're going to be having around longer. You have to sort of figure out a way of both being proud of him if he does survive the war, but also being willing to let go of him if he doesn't. And so there's many. So if our survival is dependent upon the disposability of males, it's very much more challenging to think of males as being able to be someone we just want to cherish forever. In addition to which, in order to be willing to be disposable, for the boy to prepare himself that way to be disposable, he's got to disconnect from his feelings. He's got to, if he's at boot camp and he's let's say he's Jewish, and somebody is making anti-Semitic comments and he says, well, that's very anti-Semitic, he's going to be told to do 50 new push-ups. He's going to be told, that he's going to be laughed at by the other guys. And what he learns to do is to disconnect from who he is as a human being and connect only to what he can do. In other words, to focus on becoming a human doing, becoming a sergeant or a colonel or some other position where he can do more. And so these are things that have led us to to caring about men when they take responsibility for saving our lives, but not caring about men as human beings. And so
Yeah.
we've been much more conscious of protecting and caring for and nurturing our daughters in the last half century than we have our sons.
Now, as part, so is that a deficit in purpose? Is
That
that
very good. That's what happens here now is, as you may be even listening to this and saying, well, not as many men are needed for war now as they used to be. And
actually, yeah.
you'd be 100% right. And the good news is that fewer men are dying in war and fewer men
Right.
are dying in workplace deaths than they used to, although the workplace deaths are still very significant. But the challenge there is, the good news is boys and men are surviving. The bad news is that this used to be boys and men's sense of purpose. And
Mm.
with fewer men having this sense of purpose, boys are experiencing a purpose void. And here is where dads come in to be so important. When boys are being brought up by moms alone, moms are usually very good at nurturing the boy, saying, oh, sweetie, you're really good at singing. You could be a real singer. You could, you remember those lines so well and you act so well, or you're good at basketball, you're good at this or that. And noticing the boy's dreams, moms are good at, and they're also encouraging the boy's dreams. The problem is that when the boy pursues his or her dreams, moms tend not to be as focused on boundary enforcement, and
Mm.
therefore they don't require the boy or the girl to have the postponed gratification that creates the discipline, excuse me, to be able to fulfill their dreams. And so when a boy tries his dreams over and over again and continues to fail because he doesn't have the discipline to succeed, because he doesn't have a dad around with more of a tough love orientation and saying,
Mhm.
I'm sorry, if you don't complete this, you won't get that. And then following through on that, the boy tends to fail, be discouraged about pursuing dreams in the future.
And I'm talking with Dr. Warren Farrell. Financial Times called you one of the 100 top thought leaders in the world. I've got a mentor who actually lives out there in that area in Santa Rosa, Dr. Dennis, and his mantra for us is ideas have consequences. And I again, the boy crisis is the name of the book, but you didn't start by writing things like the boy crisis and about purpose of men. And in fact, coming out of UCLA and NYU, you got very involved in women's equality.
Mm-hmm.
You ended up on the board of the National Organization for Women. Is that right?
Yeah, that's excuse me. A frog in my throat. I kissed the
No
frog.
problem. We're going to be able to edit this. That's not an issue.
Oh, very good. I kissed the frog, but there was no prince. Let's see. My background was for a number of years in the late 60s, early 70s. I was deeply interested in the women's movement and put my focus on that, and was on the board of directors of the National Organization for Women in New York City. And then I used to speak all around the world on behalf of women's issues. And I still care a great deal about exactly what the best part of the women's movement. And the best part of the women's movement was opening up options for our daughters. And I think we all, recognize that the bright young women among us,
Right.
we want them to have options to be whoever they want to be. And the fact that they were restricted from that was something that didn't maximize what God intended for our daughters or for our sons. And so there was an enormous potential out there that wasn't being fulfilled.
Right.
Conversely, there was also an enormous potential for boys to be nurturing, loving boys. And that potential is greater now than it ever has been in the past. But we have not expanded the possibility of a boy that is more oriented toward family and toward fathers. We have not honored him by saying that, well, you can be a full-time father, or you can be significantly more involved with your children than you are. Or do you know, Dad, that once you get to about $70,000 a year, depending on where in the country you live, the amount of money you make after that is not nearly as significant for your child's development and happiness as the amount of time you spend with your
Mm.
child. That basically,
Wow.
dad's time is more important than dad's dime.
Wow. That's so strong. Now, your bio says talked about this period in your life, and it says, not your bio, but it's what Wikipedia, whoever did that for you, says. It says during your feminist period, as if that was a season. I remember. It seems to me it was right at the turn of the century, right around the year 2000. Camille Paglia wrote a New York Times op-ed. It was essentially titled "Where Are All the Men?" And it seemed to me like the feminist or season or movement, it's kind of like the unions, around the 1900s did so many good things for workers' safety and so forth. Seems like the feminist movement somewhat went beyond perhaps what the initial ideas were, and it became a women's movement to the deprivation of men. And
Yes,
then she wrote this article, "Hey, where all the men go?"
yes, yes. Well,
Fascinating to
absolutely.
me.
When the first book I wrote that was really questioning this, and that was part of my transition, was the book Why Men Are the Way They Are. And I was looking at, we've focused at that point in time, that was 1986,
Right.
we'd focused a great deal on the women's movement. And I and Betty Friedan wrote a book called The Second Stage, which almost no one knows about. And the second stage was Betty Friedan's accurate vision, I believe, saying that the women's movement is only going to be so successful, it's going to be plateaued and limited in its success if we don't only just encourage women to share men's roles when they want to, but also encourage young men to become fathers and share in the mother's role. And so not everyone is intended for. Many men are a sort of very traditional type of men, and they should be honored for doing things that are traditional. And many women are traditional type of women, and they should be honored that way. But anyone that's been any of us that have been a parent know that every child in a short period of time you see some core dimension of their personality, and it's in the old days we couldn't afford to nurture that uniqueness in personality. My father, when I turned out when I was in high school, I started writing my first book, and my father said, "You be aware, Warren. I see that you're a good writer, but only about 1 in 100 writers find a publisher, and if you can't find a publisher, you'll never find a wife." And so I started reading to disprove my father, of course. And so I started looking at Zelda Fitzgerald, who said exactly that to her,
Yeah.
to Scott Fitzgerald. I love you passionately, but I will not marry you until you have your first bestseller. And then when I started writing on psychology and so on, my father would say, psychology teaches people to do what they want to do. People have to learn to do what they need to do, what they obligations and responsibilities. That's the core to being a successful parent, not not what do I want to do. So my dad had a lot of wisdom, even though he didn't realize, as I said to my dad, that your great generation has freed us to be able to make more flexible decisions than anyone in history has ever been free to do before. The challenge is making those decisions responsibly and not just focusing on our own freedom. So when I first began to discover, when I was on the board of NOW, I started seeing in the mid 70s that there were increasing numbers of divorces. And when I started to study those divorces and the children of those divorces, I said something that changed my life, which is I said to the board members of NOW, I said, I am noticing that the children of divorce who do not have a lot of father involvement are having a lot more problems than those that do. And I was met with total silence.
Wow.
And I'll never forget this moment. And finally, someone spoke up and said, you know, Warren, are you suggesting that we shouldn't be allowing moms to be able to make the decision as to whether they want the father involved or not? And are you suggesting that we shouldn't be just very open about encouraging women to be single mothers if they don't want to be tied down to marrying a particular man that they don't love that much? And I said, a woman, I will always support a woman's free choice. But when a woman makes a free choice to raise a child, it's like me making a free choice to take a job. When I take that job, I commit myself to certain lack of freedoms in exchange for what that job brings. And when you have a child, you commit yourself to not freedom to just make every decision you want, but to putting everything through the funnel of your children's self-interest. And
Exactly.
there was such tension at that moment on the board. And because a lot of women agreed with that, but they also felt that politically speaking, they would lose NOW members, and they had a lot of fights, political fights to deal with. And so not just custody issues. And so I was basically told, well, you admitted to us, Warren, that your research is only in its first stages. It hasn't been longitudinal because divorces haven't been around in huge numbers for a long period of time. So why don't you go out and see what else you find as years pass? And so I did that. But I knew that as I found more and more that children need their dads, and discovered why, discovering what dads do that is different from what moms do. That's when I started going from 50 speaking engagements a year sponsored by the feminist community down to zero.
Zero.
And so that had a very big impact on my income, let us say.
But here's the thing. This is exactly, we're talking about the book, The Boy Crisis. You've written a number of other books, Why Men the Way They Are, The Myth of Male Power, and so forth. But, the boy crisis for me, the summation, just to me, the bottom line is boys need dads.
Yes.
And what you did is, rather than my background being more of a church background, son of a pastor, it would kind of be a man in a pulpit stands up and makes this declaration. Jesus told us to pray, Our Father, which I think is highly significant because we don't think in words, we think in images. So God gave us an image of the way we're to pray that portrayed him as someone who gives us identity or center, discipline, security, the things the Father provides. But what you did is how many years did it take to do the research? Let me just read one thing and then you can answer that. This is because I've got so many Black American friends, and I know this is being listened to all over the world. I think it's the same thing, but one of the things you wrote or reported on in your research was, in a majority Black community, the main predictor of growing up poor was not race, but being born to parents who were not married. In other words, the predictor of growing up in poverty, in other words, fatherlessness is a leading indicator of poverty in every culture of the world. And what you said was the greatest indicator was not growing up in a bad space. It was growing up in a bad environment in terms of not having a dad, not having a marriage around you.
You're absolutely right. And this, I want to make sure that I'm not credited with this, but this was the original finding on this was Patrick Moynihan's
Yeah, the
study
Moynihan report.
called
Yeah.
the Moynihan Report in 1965. But here's the amazing information. So in 1965, Patrick Moynihan, who was a sociologist and a US Senator and Department of Labor chair under both Republican and Democratic administrations, he finds that, and people are afraid that when he investigates the inner cities and why there's so much crime there, that he's going to come out with this, this racist, this phenomenon that would be blaming the African American community. But he sees that, yes, it's true that in the African American community there's more crimes, but it's only in that 25% of the African American community where there's dad deprivation, where the children don't know their father, they have minimal contact with their father.
Mhm.
And the other 75% is a much different perspective on that. However, today, it is now more than about 74, 75% of the African American community the children grow up in fatherless homes. In the Caucasian community, it is now 35%. That is higher than it used to be in the African American community of 25%. It
Mhm.
used to be, when Moynihan did a study, it was only 3%, a little bit over 3% of children of Caucasian homes grew up in fatherless homes or minimal amount of father involvement.
Yeah,
And
okay.
so the amount of increase of father involvement has been a 12-fold increase of dad deprivation. I said father involvement, but I should have said the amount of increase of dad-deprived children in the Caucasian community is 12 times higher than it used to be. In the African American community, it's 3 times higher. And what I discovered was that was where our children were having the problems, academically, socially, empathy-wise. And it's really weird to think of empathy as something that increases the degree to which father involvement increases, because you usually think of empathy as being connected to a mom, and empathy often is connected to a mom, but it's connected to, but children that have a lot of focus on their feelings are often children that learn to focus on their feelings and not on anybody else's feelings but theirs, and therefore they don't tend to be as empathetic, ironically. And so that began my studies of what do dads and moms do differently that leads to children that have both dads and moms being so much more happy, successful,
Yeah.
and adjusted in life.
You also mentioned something. With our ministry, Christian Men's Network, we call it the Viagra Syndrome. And that is this: you said grandfathers can be of great value. And the reason we call it the Viagra Syndrome is it came from a friend of mine who pastors New Jerusalem Church, the largest Black American church in Mississippi, Dwayne Pickett. And he said, it used to be years ago, there were grandpas on the front porches, and there were grandpas that would, while the dads were off working, they would say, "Hey, come here, son, let me teach you some things." And he said,
Yes.
the grandpas aren't there anymore. What Pastor Dwayne said, he said, they still think they're players.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, Dwayne, that's because of the Viagra syndrome. They're full of chemicals. And but you said something in page 217 in the printed version of the Boy Crisis. You said, when the biological father is missing, can God the Father help? That was a fascinating thing. That just jumped out at me because of my orientation. St. Paul Community Baptist Church in Bedford-Stuyvesant, which is somewhat near where you grew up. Is that right?
Yes, correct. I grew up in New York, New Jersey area.
Yeah. And you talked about guys that didn't have any time with their dads and so forth. But you talked about how the priests and how him leading them into faith actually helped them find a place of center.
Yes. So what happened at the Bedford-Stuyvesant Church is, when I was finished talking to the congregation, the pastor brought me to a back room, and there were 32 boys there, and they had been in about 4 different groups of boys that talked with each other, and I went around the group and I said, what's your background and so on, and of those 32 boys, 28 of them had been in prison.
Mm.
And almost every one of them had very minimal or no contact with their dads.
Wow.
And so, and then I talked with them more in depth, and I said, now let's go around the room, and let me ask you, for who in this group what was your belief in God and your attendance of church and your involvement in the church, the faith-based community, for whom was that important? And I didn't just get me. I got, if it wasn't for this, for our involvement in this church, I would be doing all the same things that got me into jail to begin with, because the great majority of them had been in prison, and they had, stolen things or done drugs, or, held up a grocery store or whatever. And they all sort of, that was the way they lived their life. And they said that, their belief in God and their attendance of church, they're finding an alternative. They didn't put it as alternative community, but what they would say sort of more like, getting to know Jimmy over here and seeing that he had the same problems that I had made me realize I wasn't all alone, and I could talk to Jimmy about that. And the fact that our group was confidential, and I saw other boys had the same problems that I had. And I had, we had this very wonderful minister who was getting us engaged in outdoor activities, and it was like a community was built up that, that led me to feeling I had, I didn't have a father at home, but I had God the Father, and I could see and feel, not just a theory of the importance
Right.
of God the Father, but that, for about 27, 28 of those boys out of the 32, that God the Father and the involvement with that community really was created a much richer and hopeful life, and an improved character
Mm.
among all those boys. And what we all want as parents is an improved and an enhanced character in our children.
Yeah, we seem to be a culture, Dr. Farrell, we seem to be a culture that over the last, I wouldn't know, maybe a decade, 2 decades, we seem to be more concerned about the calorie content of our children's lunches than the character content of our children's hearts.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the not the calorie content, but what you're eating for lunch is very, very helpful part. And so, for boys, sometimes, what you have for lunch is sort of can be a male thing of, like I've had pizza and stuff like that, as opposed to, don't focus on the fact that vegetables might be better for you than pizza. That's sort of like, fairy type of stuff. And we have to recognize that we have to bring to our children both an understanding of nutrition and an understanding
There's
of the
no question.
importance of exercise, and then
Yeah,
also an understanding of dads.
the stat I just read, Dr. Farrell, was 22 million of our children in the United States are nutritionally deficient. And Harvard, I think it was a few years ago, just came out with that study on the thinning of the cortex, as they called it, and that it didn't have any, that it had to do with our food deserts and that sort of thing, but it had to do with nutrition.
Mhm.
And in Belize, in our work in Belize, one of the teachers said to me something that correlated that and actually put it in words that for me was better understandable. Thinning of the cortex, short-term memory, all that. What she said to me one day was, a hungry kid can't learn.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
And in the United States of America, and in the most Western of the 52 countries you mentioned, that shouldn't be the case. It
Yeah.
shouldn't be the case. So some of our young men that we all of a sudden we just put them in jail.
Yeah.
You know what? Bam, you don't measure up, you're going to jail. When in fact, the issue, really part of it, is our issue, because we allowed them to live in a food desert. We allowed to live them nutritionally deprived, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I understand the government isn't the solution of everything, but I'm saying churches, family, people, we can't be blind to the issue that really creates some of these things. And you said something in your speech is really, really the one that the TEDx that you did at Marin, when you said, if I'm not mistaken, you said we had created 18 new prisons in California where you live. We created 18 new prisons and one new university
Yes,
in
yes.
the same period of time.
Absolutely. We've had a 700% increase in the number of prisons in the United States since 1970. which is, we are now more than any other developed country in the world. Our per capita prison population is greater. But let me do something here that what I have found to be very helpful for many moms and dads. First of all, before I share this, um, let me honor the single mom. The single
Yeah.
mom works morning, noon, and night. Is usually overwhelmed. Usually is feels that she can't be as good as she wants to be in raising the children. She can't be as good as she wants to be in her work. And this is, and oftentimes as the children get older, the children are disrespectful. They're talking back. They're not productive in school. And this is, and she has devoted her heart, her life,
Hmm.
her energy into raising the children the best she can. And just feels like she's, sort of not succeeded in the way that her dreams and her hard work has led. And so, the issue here is, here's what is often happening. We were talking about food a minute ago, so I'll give my first example of food. There's moms do everything I was just talking about, and there are solutions to moms about the importance of dads, and one of those is the importance of boundary enforcement. So, for example, both sexes set boundaries pretty much the same way, moms and dads. They'll both say, sweetie, you can't have your ice cream until you finish your peas, because
Right.
we've been talking about nutrition. And the children challenge the boundaries in the same way. They want to have as few peas as possible and for them to get the ice cream.
What we did.
What's new, right?
Yeah, what we did.
And then, but the difference between moms and dads, not all the time, but most frequently, is that the children will sort of say to mom something like, I was bullied at school today, or I'm really feeling down, or I don't have any energy, or sort of, I really don't want to have all those peas. And mom thinks to herself, I don't really want to get into a huge argument about a few peas. So what I'm going to do is just tell you what, I'll tell you what, sweetie, have this many more peas, and then you can have your ice cream. And the boy goes, oh, okay. And then he learns that with mom, he can negotiate a better deal. So what he should focus on is discovering with mom where that better, what he can say or do or cry to get that better deal to operationalize. Whereas with dads, the dad is more likely to say, excuse me, we had a deal here. The deal was you couldn't have your ice cream until you finished your peas. Oh, Dad, you're so mean. Mom isn't like that. And I'm sorry, I make certain rules. Mom makes certain rules. When you're with
Yeah.
me, you obey my rules. But if you keep whining and crying, there won't be any ice cream tomorrow night either. Uh-oh. So the boy learns with dad, more likely, again, this is sometimes reversed. The boy learns with dad that he has to finish his peas. That is, he has to focus his attention on what he needs to do, that is, have the
Mhm.
vegetables, before he gets what he wants to have, the ice cream. Therefore, he's beginning to learn postponed gratification.
Yeah. It's,
He's
it's the it's the marshmallow experiment.
It's the marshmallow experience, exactly.
Yeah.
And so and the postponed gratification, as we know from that marshmallow
Mhm.
test, is the single biggest predictor of success or failure.
Wow.
And so a mom
Wow.
but a mom may look at this and say, you're forcing Jimmy to finish the peas. Uh, that shows such a lack of empathy. And if particularly if it's a stepfather, the
Yeah.
mother will often feel like, oh, he doesn't love Jimmy or Jane as much as I do. Therefore, the reason he's stricter is because he doesn't have that empathy coming from not being his own children.
Yeah.
And
If they
so,
don't discuss that, if there's not communication, there's friction there.
absolutely.
Yeah. I will
And
tell you, based on
yes,
just going back to that, to us in the Christian Men's Network and Global Fatherhood Initiative, single moms are our heroes. The Bible teaches that the church needs to. One of the first things Paul said about the church in community, he said, take responsibility for widows and orphans,
mhm,
single moms. That was one of the first, like, here's what we need to do
yes,
in
yes,
order to be a healthy community of faith.
yes, yes,
And
absolutely.
it was as important to him as it was going out and telling people about Jesus. It was, in fact, it was, let me put it this way, it was the mark that you actually have faith,
Mhm.
that you would do that.
Yes.
And so a great, as powerful, powerful word that we're talking about, The Boy Crisis, the book that I recommend. And Dr. Farrell, you've written a number of books, but this one, and I know it took you, you spent over a decade in research working. Did you say 18 years?
14 years directly on the book, but of course, I've been working on male-female issues and trying to get the sexes to understand each other since the late 1960s.
Well, getting men and women to understand each other.
Women and men to understand each other. Yeah, this is like, who could be engaged in a more hopeless activity than,
Well,
than
I think
that?
that started in the Garden of Eden.
Yeah, they did that. Yeah, I
And
don't think they
every
were.
man who reads that still blames Eve. But if you read the text, it's really Adam's fault. So,
Well, the way I look at male-female relationships is it's very much like a tango.
yeah.
And if you're going to change either sex, you really need to change both sexes dance. In that dynamic that I was just talking about, with the ice cream and the peas,
Yeah.
one of the things that emerges from that is ADHD. We all see that our boys have significantly more ADHD than our girls do, but what we don't know is that that children raised predominantly by dads, only 15% have ADHD. Children raised predominantly by moms, 30% have ADHD. And if you look at the example that I gave, the children's, the father's response to, you have to focus on finishing your P's, is that you're being rewarded for your attention being focused on doing what you need to do, finishing your P's. Whereas with mom, the attention is focused on how to manipulate a better deal with mom, and take advantage of mom's empathy in order to get that better deal, and therefore not be focused on what you need to do. And so one of the values of having both a dad and mom in the family is what I call it works the best when you have checks and balance parenting, when you have both the mom and the dad explaining what the purpose of the child finishing the P's is, and at the same time, the mom saying, when that purpose of finishing the P's is going too far and where empathy needs to rule the day. And so when you have mom and dad sort of going back and forth on that, many moms and dads, that will lead to an argument, and the argument will make the mom and dad feel that they are not really meant for each other. In fact, you are very much meant for each other. You're meant to have this positive tension between you, so that the best of both of you, the child can have the best of both of you.
Yeah, it's basically like a guitar. A guitar, we don't want tension or stress, but a guitar doesn't make good music unless there's the right amount of stress. Tension.
Indeed. Well said. Nice. I never thought of that analogy.
And with a piano sort of thing. So the thing is, and let's go back to boys and girls and men and women. And then I want to finish with one question on something you mentioned, but dads keep score, women don't in general. It's we joke about it, but it's true. A dad will go, will talk about, we win this game or lose this game because of his makeup. And it's kind of like my grandkids. I've got two of them that are close to the same age. And if you put some little toy, figures in front of my granddaughter, Audrey, she lines them up and she begins to teach them, or she puts them in rows or something like that. But if you give those same figurines to my grandson, Gray, he has like galactic contests where they run into each other and bam, bam. And there's something in us like that. And I think it is that balance and that tension, right?
Yeah. Oh, it certainly is. And you see this in so many ways. So I'll give an example that will seem a little bit superficial until we get into it a little bit more in depth. A very typical difference in this section of the Boy Crisis book that deals with the differences between mom-style parenting and dad-style parenting, and what each contributes to the children doing better. And one of the differences is the differences in roughhousing. And children and dads will oftentimes do things like, okay, we have 3 kids. Okay, the 3 of you, I'm going to toss the 3 of you onto the couch. And your job, kids, is the 3 of you have to jump on my back and pin me down before I pin the 3 of you down. Oh boy, Dad, that's great. And now mom's looking on and thinking, oh my God, I feel I have here just like one more child to monitor in the dad. And but yet I don't want to be controlling, and the kids seem to be having fun, so I'm not going to interfere. But I just feel in my gut that sooner or later somebody's going to end up getting hurt.
That's what my wife would yell upstairs to our game room.
Yes, yes.
She would yell, somebody's going to get hurt.
Yeah.
And I'd start cracking up and going, well, that's the point.
That's the, I wouldn't go quite that far, but let's take a look at the value of what you just said, which is that that sure enough, mom is only about 99.5% likely to be right. And so sooner or later, somebody starts crying. And, to get into the mom's head, she's thinking, oh my goodness, I knew that this was going to happen. Now she's beginning to feel guilty. She didn't interfere sooner because it was her responsibility to protect the kids. And she was seduced into their having fun. And so she's now blaming herself. But now, what happens is the dad goes, okay, Jimmy, you stuck your elbow in Krista's face. You can't do that. That's what made Krista cry. You do that one more time or anything like that one more time, that's the end of the roughhousing.
Right.
Okay, and mom goes, wait a minute. You're saying you're going to continue the roughhousing after you just saw that the children cried? And sure enough, dad does that. And sure enough, the child maybe this time doesn't stick the elbow in his sister's eye, but pushes his younger brother too roughly. And dad goes, that was too rough. Well, I didn't put my elbow in Krista's eye. No, but that was too rough a push. And you sort of know that was too rough a push. If you do that again, there'll be no more roughhousing till tomorrow night. And so now the children start roughhousing again. And now we're experiencing what psychologists call emotional intelligence under fire. The children are committed to not doing those things that make their brother or sister cry, but the excitement of winning overcomes the commitment. And so sooner or later they do something like become too aggressive again, and dad then stops the roughhousing and says, now there'll be no more roughhousing till tomorrow night. And mom goes, haven't you learned twice in a row the same outcome came, and now you're still promising the roughhouse the next night? And dad doesn't explain effectively that the next night is when all the goodies come. That is, the children do when they're told not to be too aggressive or too assert or to not stick an elbow in the sister's or brother's face. Now they know they're going to lose what they want to have, the roughhousing, if they don't do what their immediate gratification is. And so they start learning postponed gratification. They also start learning the difference between being assertive and aggressive. And they also start learning empathy. Now, this is all scientifically proven. The dads that roughhouse, when children roughhouse with their dads, they learn as a result of this dynamic that they have to think of somebody else's feelings, their sisters or brothers' feelings, in order to get what they want to have, that roughhousing. And so no one explains this to mom. And moms can't hear what dads don't say. It's not dad's fault either, because the reason I wrote these descriptions in the Boy Crisis book was because I couldn't find them in any parenting magazine or any other parenting book. And so therefore dads can't explain what they themselves don't know. And so there's a communication gap, and the mom just thinks the dad is a child, as opposed to understanding that the dad has an intuitive way of doing things that has historically served a purpose that no one is able to explain anymore. And the power of this is that the child with postponed gratification that knows the difference between being assertive and aggressive and that is empathetic, that child is far more likely to have friends in school. because friends want somebody that thinks of somebody besides themselves, that
Right.
knows the difference between being assertive and aggressive. And when they have postponed gratification, they're honored by their teachers, a boyfriend, girlfriend. Girls are honor them. Girls don't go out with losers; they go out with winners. And when boys can finish things and do things, girls are interested in them. So therefore, the boys don't have to withdraw into porn, because porn is basically access to a variety of attractive women without fear of rejection at a price he can afford. And so he starts getting addicted to porn if he doesn't have this type of social skills and postponed gratification because of the loser-winner syndrome and dating it. He starts feeling down on himself, gets depressed, withdraws into video games and video game addiction because his friends are not in real life nearly as much as they are in that video game. And so or he has surrogate heroes that he worships, as opposed to thinking of his own self confidence and
Wow.
confidence. And so when the boys are that way, the boys withdraw. They're more likely to be depressed, suicidal. They're more likely to drink, get into drugs. Then they're more likely to act out. So of our school shooters in the 21st century, the ones that have committed 10 or more shootings, every single one of them is a dad-deprived boy.
Wow.
Of ISIS recruits, 90% of ISIS recruits are dad-deprived, both the boys and the girls. And of the prisoners, 93% of our prisoners are males. It doesn't surprise too many people. But what does surprise people is that of those 93% who are male in prison, about 85 to 90% are dad deprived. And so the roughhousing example is a little bit of just one of about a dozen examples of what dads bring to the family table that is so important to be integrated with the hard work, the beauty, and the devotion, and the caring and the nurturing that moms bring to the family table.
You know, we're gonna close. I'm talking with Dr. Warren Farrell, who wrote The Boy Crisis. You've written a number of other books, and you can find that on Amazon and on your Warren Farrell, 2 R's, 2 L's. Oh, actually 4 R's, Warren Farrell. But, on warrenfarrell.com, you can find his materials there. I just want to recommend that every single man listening to me right now, dad, single man, anybody in kind of leadership, if you're a pastor, a priest, a rabbi, whoever it is, The Boy Crisis, Warren Farrell, along with your friend John Gray. And it is, the things we could keep talking for a long time. I want to just say this. Thank you for having the foresight, the ability to withstand the pain of what it takes to do this, the research, everything you had to do this. Thank you, Dr. Warren Farrell, and your wife, who had to put up with you late nights writing or whenever it is that you write. And
Yes, bless her.
and all of that in order to create something that I believe is going to set a lot of people free. And I just thank you for it. The Christian Men's Network Global Fatherhood Initiative, we're very indebted to you, brother. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Let's do some work together. Let's integrate these our respective skill sets and life devotions and make it happen at a broader level.
I'd like to do that. God bless, brother.
Thank you. It's just a pleasure. You're just a good question asker, and you listen so well, and you care so much, and it must be wonderful for the people that you help.
Thanks. This is our life, man. This is what it's about. It's the future of the world and change. We say you change the heart of a dad, you've touched the soul of a nation.
Yes, indeed.
There you go. God bless you, brother. I'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Yes, you too.